got a really great show for us today. It's interesting because, names, yes, can't be too scientific much, is it? Because, what do we know about the definition of something which, like, for instance, vaccine, when it was supposed to be that you've developed an antibody for something, but all of a sudden AIDS comes along and they see you've got this add-on. So now if you've got an antibody to that, you must have the condition and this sort of thing. And eventually, of course, perhaps this is not something like used to be defined as a vaccine, and so we'll just call this a military prototype, and so this just was one name. Something was these injectables was given, but the developing and seeing that an add-on or a gain of function could cause proteins to be made that would, just be spiking everything so that your red blood corpuscle and cells all become spiculated, and these spike ferritin sort of nanoparticle that would be put into tiny little spheres, and then what's that sort of filtered through? It used to be sort of asbestos to get down to the sides, but if they've chucked the asbestos away, is that the reason why you can find particles, of course, of graphene oxide in things? There can be a reason for that, perhaps. But during the trials where April 2021 was, you've got the development of researchers using terms that's like, we've got a vaccine prototype or something, or an SPFN vaccine candidate. It's just really described, and what's transparent about any of it, and did anybody read any packet? There wasn't any insert or nothing. And these were just things given the parent, which is experimental. And the term military referred to sort of developing this under the Institute of the Army, and so that it wasn't like a classification of a general name for all of the vaccines. And now you've got biologics and sort of like, what's that? I mean, is that a vaccine? Biologics is another name, and it's just the current official names for things, and where symptoms that somebody had is just shuffled underneath another name, and going back and forward. This is really completely not scientific at all. And then terms like what is a biogenic or a biomimetic, for instance, which relates to the study of the imitation of biological systems, but broader in the field of research, more where technology is a vaccine, is a type of a biological medical product, isn't it? And the substances is made from actually living organism, and it's in a pleomorphic state, so it's not sterile like you would think, because Pasteur just lied. No such thing was anything that wasn't turbid afterward, even using heat. So the development of all of this isn't too transparent, is it? That you've got all of these official names that are given, and a cocktail of things quite. And so how does one be determined of another, where you've got such a cocktail effect of things? And so you've got brand names, of course, and community, and then Spikevax. You've got biologics, it's called. Bio meaning life, logic. So you've got life logics. Life logics that are given into infusions as IV drips. And did you know that was going on? Or was that just sort of automatic? It goes into any fluid, apparent, where hospital clinic settings are. And the process really is known as giving you a biological infusion and delivering medicated drug, which slowly could be set, like a set period of time administered, where some medical professionals would have been. And the historical what's done where the hospital is, it's really even home-based IV infusions and possibly trained healthcare providers where there could be not any care too much of the safety or a monitored consideration, especially when people were told not to process really any claims. And there were standout orders about that. And so what really happened where the elderly was to be intubated and something prophylactic, but yet all of them died because you had to use 3 drugs, which were pretty deadly. And then if you gave them the shots and then they had flu shots beforehand, it's like really a caught-up battle that didn't consider anyone's title or right, and then just pulled all of that away. And there really wasn't any competency where any beloved was within a situation of this, which really was just a great scandemic ongoing until stopped that crime. Biologics really you could consider as a class of medical sorts of living organisms, actual life colloid, and it's used apparent to treat some sort of a serious condition. But the fact of things actually being caught isn't the condition at all, but the body rusting and rotting because the terrain isn't kept. And so was there any effort to actually keep your terrain right? No. So it's sort of really a bit of a wrong approach, isn't it? But today, where anyone is, healthcare providers can be prescribing things where you've got a treatment plan perhaps, and shouldn't you have a proper approach? Maybe you need to have a second opinion, because conventional approach might not consider nutrition and detox. So it's biologics that's intravenous through IVs, and how often would have that been, and where that was those substances administered, and subcutaneous injections, and did that go into the blood? Did that go into the muscle? Did that go into the lymph? Did it just go into the tissue of the muscle? Where a catheter is, you've got IV infusions and everything sort of ordered where drugs are, and biologics could have been just directly put into the vein, and the hospital clinical setting control sort of rate, and drugs where they would have entered the blood system. Is that the reason for all the turbo cancers, which is coming up that you see right now? You've got all of the subcutaneous injections really that require professional administration, of course, and does anybody aspirate the needle properly, or are gas molecules also going in there, so air embolisms and things just like that can happen? And where does the needle stop? Is there something about that? If it stops in a blood vessel or if it doesn't, you see? And how much of that material goes directly into the blood versus it's in the tissue? These are things which is alarming because you've really got an invasive condition. And life colloidal spore, which everything will pleomorph that's inside that, and, you know, if you just let it be, and finally you would just see some inorganic materials left behind, crystallised, as it was dried. So the molecules really are present where your body is to be able to cause your terrain to be good, and so then your brain and support for neurotransmitters is. And what is it that you consume, and when you don't consume things, where is it that you're having an activeness and also then a rest cycle? Because these are the things that control your immunity, and these are sort of behavioural things. There's more the compulsive obsessive types of conditions which you don't have, where you're empty inside as an original condition. It really is how you're responding properly in the ultradian rhythms of the day and these sorts of things. And these are the kinds of things which is completely forgotten, including how do you get human growth hormone release naturally. So life colloid is found, and mycotoxin, which is the excrement of those life colloid, comes to be just deposited as in your body as a sewer, influencing the body's natural capacity to sort of have hormone release properly and have a thrivingness. And so you could have testosterone and melatonin, and you can have a really good sleep-wake cycle. Otherwise, you've got mycotoxin. Have you ever heard about that? That's the excrement of having life colloid formed, pleomorphed in a very poor terrain from healthy cells by aggregating, fusing, and differentiating. So peptidoglycans that's usually found where life colloid mold, fungus, and yeast is could be there where bacterial cell walls are. And it's really confirmed that you could look into the saliva and find these things. You could detect this substance in the brain tissue as well. So there's specific regions which is associated to your life, like circadian, meaning, you've got a daily rhythm, and an ultradian within the day rhythm. And these are cleansing moments where things are, and micronutrient gets passed on properly, where you and I, we're sort of in a more monophasic way to live, where consumption is of food, life food. So the levels of life colloid where molecule is drop, and where sleep is, all of that could become more fragmented and less restorative if, there is no quiet, rested, non-REM sleep and a deeper sleep, and routing signals too close to you, and all of these things can be impacting the frequencies and stuff that would be necessary for melatonin to be released. And deep sleep is going to improve or condition enormously. And so the gut life colloid, where the molecular signal is communicating directly via a JC quanta through resonance, and it does this through cavity space resonance, and the junction that sits between these is called a T-junction. And the brain and the body could be influenced where its proper functioning nerve force is. And can you have this if you don't have these life colloid in your intestine? Do you know that the appendix is ever more sort of like a smaller brain where your whole body is? And do you know that the brain upstairs, very importantly, functions only because the brain downstairs is giving it proper signals? So life colloid really play a role where mood is, and it's life colloid that's below the level of RNA and DNA. Yes, and that sort of replication. You've got, before this, a polymerization, and you've got a foldedness of life colloid, and everything is living down there, and something mechanical going on. So life colloid really play a role where mood and immunity and digestion is, and your reasoning behind what is the byproduct that should be there, which, like selenium glutathione peroxidase, which also levoresinol and which are life colloid implant inside you. And these are linked to the brain regulation of carbon and oxygen and energetic elementary sort of micromineral and other polypeptide, of course, molecules which are inside the brain itself. And so how does this all get transported up into the brain? Because you've really there got albumin, which is your super transporter, and as a platelet. And it's only one out of 120-odd. It's small enough, yes? It's small enough to cross through the blood-brain barrier and to carry and transport nutrients through. And so where moments of fibrin and globulin are, because anything attacked on the body caused those things to be raised and albumin to be lost, how do you see life colloid easily able to cross through and result, in proper brain function? Unless you've got your gut. You've minded the gut to gut the mind, you see. So looking at your noted sort of lipid chylomicron, which are really small molecules which is easy able to bring nutrient across the brain and cause really a beautiful health or a loss of health because that's not going on. And just as, like, for instance, a boy, this blood-brain barrier doesn't really form until this child is around about 19 months of age, where for her, her brain when she's born is a little bit more matured already. And so everyone's which has got a bit of a compromised condition, and then toxin comes in, sort of really, it's got a little bit of a loss of albumin, and albumin is your super transporter, transporting nutrient and waste. And what happens when you've lost that? Can you see the trains pulling into the station, or just trains brushing past, not picking up anything? So the logic really that's considered, really, that the terrain is everything, explains everything, all right? You've got a metabolic and cognitive physiological health, yes? Otherwise, you've got a little bit of a disorder about that. So you've really got a lack capacity for situational awareness, like what we've been talking about here. Otherwise, I think it's really good that you would have tuned into the idea that what's below the level of a cell, how did a cell arise, how does RNA and DNA arise, and where does life begin? If you're looking and you can't see any DNA or RNA, does life exist where this is? Yes, it does. Why? Because it's this which comes together toward making RNA and DNA itself. And its life and it's below the level of a cell. It's really you and I having a situational awareness, really, of what's going on and what's happening where a person in their habits have got delayed sleep activation, for instance, and your sleep pattern explains so much, of course, because you really need your brown fat cells working at night to be able to clear up things, and you need glucagon for that. And so how about tuning into the other podcasts a little? But the life colloid terrain has to be like what you're focused on. Otherwise, then there's mental fatigue, of course, and life colloid in the gut and the brain are quite related. And so you've got microscopic dialogue which is going on between gut, where the life colloid is there, and nerve, where life colloidal tissue is. And this sort of really opens up a door more inside where the type of approach that you're using. And rather than using sedatives and things where future sleep therapy is, maybe you should really target the life colloid that's inside the gut and the external cell, where it's got proper circadian and diurnal cycles, where rest active and your dark and light cycle is. It's a clock which gets set by more your ethmoid organ, which is picking up micropulsations coming through the crust and tuning in where consumption is. And consumption could just be sort of modest, to be just only monophasic, only once a day, more or less. And the activities where internal wakefulness is in life, you've got a quality of things which is really circadian diurnal in the cycles of things. And so life colloid adjusts where molecule is, and it's very specific. And so you've got molecules produced like selenium glutathione peroxidase and things. So it's important, of course, because people could have really looked at the blood, yes, and the life colloid where the blood is. And under a microscopic insight, you can see life colloid that makes up the largest component conducting energy across space. And this is conducted on a JC quanta, which is the tiniest, smallest particle that light is made of itself. And it's quadrillion times smaller than light is. So it's a microscopic world where you're going down into the fourth dimension below hydrogen, and you've got a framework where you've got an overall situational awareness, and you've got a morphogenic field that's a 4D printing, which causes things to be assembled upon. And someone would need to be able to have a proper math where you could really model a smoke trail in the air, and you've learned proper math. Otherwise, it's not a math that really can sort of get you the area of a leaf or anything. Modern science really could have become trapped where that is, in commercial and non-logical and very subject bias, obviously, and the response framework where things are sort of a mistake, where something isn't really being considered what's natural and so what's ecological. And so the matter really where a whole reality is, it's your focus on the terrain is everything, and the life colloid isn't anything in relation to the terrain. It's the window which otherwise is really selling something separate and argument, yet there's really a JC quanta where language is. And as you listen into these podcasts, of course, you could really be a bit challenged where conventional like sciences and the foundation where physics really cannot be aware that there's two other states of a colloid that isn't mentioned to people. You see, that's a gel state and a plasma state. So people could really be stuck in materialism where that is, and defended things which was just from a biased perception. So unless you're focused on superposition and critical time, it's like, what are you doing? Isn't that something which you should sort of have brought into the present world? And so you've got a non-Euclidean math which gives you the ability to be able to get the area of a leaf, and it's a specific type of math which really doesn't have anything parallel. So that's part of the rules of non-Euclideanness. You don't have anything that's simultaneous in the math, so that's another principle. You don't have anything as a straight line, you only have arcs, so this is another principle. Something isn't simultaneous, of course, because something happens before something else does. That's another principle. You can't have more than more than two right angles, meaning you can only have one right angle exact, and then everything else is not going to really be a right angle. So this is sort of the things which is nature, you see, and science should be grounded more in a quanta, where the element really is, and you've gone below the level of hydrogen, certainly. And this is like what's called 4D printing. And this goes down, as I said, all the way to quadrillion units in a light second. So what's sacred really is the mystery more that you've got where you are. And this is something which gives you a full cosmology. And that is possible that that's missing where things are. And this is sort of more your renewed sense. So whole brain patterning is cognition. And this is sort of suggested where light is very slow, of course, and light comes out of dark, which dark is much faster than light. And so what comes out of dark is very slow, and that's light that you and I see. So this is the leading quanta, and it's abandoning what the Euclidean math has been of the past, terrible, and all the equations that were done with that, which is just a completely wrong math. And you need to move more to a non-Euclidean principles and teach this, you see. And so you're going into a situational awareness which is over the top of what perception is, which is your wakeful state, which is only 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information, which you're conscious of, everything else below, and this is awareness that's above that wakeful state. Otherwise, there's 2 other states, that's dreaming, which is certainly limited, and deep sleep, which is certainly limited. And so it's really what's natural, more what you could do, which is definitely more ecological, and what's natural sort of versus what's not ecological. It's sort of really how your body really functions, and it's really not held by any false principle, of course. And a whole number, that's another principle, doesn't exist where non-Euclidean math is. So a whole number doesn't really exist, you see. So where a whole number doesn't exist, does something exist beyond absolute zero? Yes, it does. It continues on to infinity. But if you only thought of a whole number, you think, oh, well, something just finishes where that is. So there isn't anything parallel and there isn't anything straight. And the moment that this is, which is mutually beneficial, this is really true. So it's the edges of your precognitive style where consciousness is, and could you feel that there's a lot more for you to learn, especially the life colloid is more a living organism composed of quality of life, and the building blocks of life, which is each important detail. Of course, you've got your own reproductive schedule inside a cell and tissue, and might I ask, that a red blood corpuscle is what comes to be before a sperm cell is existed or an egg? Yes, it does. And that sperm and that egg comes from a red blood corpuscle and the double spore that's within that red blood corpuscle. So you've found that there's a third state, of course, that we'd be talking about, that's between life and death, and cells which don't really die when you do, apparent. And they adapt and reorganize themselves and rebuild. And scientists really have discovered that certain cells sort of removed from a dead organism and given the right environment can take on a newly entire life form. And in some cases, of course, organize themselves to be into living mobile sort of structure where unique behavior and function is. And a red blood corpuscle can be cloned and an organism come from this, but it's sort of really only half the size that it might ordinarily be. And so the state where research is truly that where life and death is, and that something is happening between where this is a third state. And it's really an experiment where skin cells from anybody deceased or frog embryos and those sorts of things are really being placed in a petri dish and sort of spontaneously assembled into tiny organisms. They're life colloid. And they pleomorph and have many changing forms and all relate to each other. So unlike ordinary cells, you've got structure, which in the membrane of this has it stored in the tissue protoplasm memory. And so it has the ability to be able to move for itself and heal and damage and replicate and do this through a polymerization instead of like mitotic cell division and this sort of thing. So shaping other cells and copying themselves, it's really, scientists could be discovered evermore that similar behavior where human cells are formed, and they could be flown away from you. Let's say that they were sperm cells. Studies showed that where somebody was given poppers, their cells far away reacted just the same as the cells in the dish that was close by. So you've got superposition certain, and are you aware of all of this? Because you're kind of moving more into a JC quanta in the modern world to navigate your surroundedness and help repair. And a plasticity in this day of an ability of the life colloid to pleomorph and change identity and cause a new organelle according to the environment, and suggesting sort of that organismal sort of death where each life colloid is having its own sentience, and eventually where its demise is only left for its own self. It turns to this rather than yours or mine, and abandons its role in its mutual lived assistance where you and I are. And it's the terrain, which is everything that allows these cells to function properly. And so otherwise there's a bit of a pleomorphic going on, and the body rots and rusts and breaks down into bacteria. Do you know about this? Well, you should. And so fetal endoblastic cells is just a simple sort of neoplastic cell at some level where you are when you're forming, and you're just a bunch of simple endoblastic cells which haven't differentiated. And the moment pressure comes on, that starts to be differentiated, and it's switching from aerobic glycolysis to oxidative metabolism. And the memory of this way of getting energy is still in a recapitulative state, and those genes could be switched on or off, and this is sort of really what neoplastic conditions are. So rising where new possibility is in regeneration, of course, is really nothing short of consciousness being only a very limited phenomena, like we said, sleep and dreaming, certain limitations, and awareness is where you are, and this is over the top of those few states. It's really the learning that the life colloid that gives everything to you, and you command and have life vicariously because of the colloid of life, which you really can't cut with a diamond knife, and that can't be destroyed. It's like a bubble that you would be trying to cut underwater. You can't do that. It's just a bubble. So life colloid really exists in two states. And one is oxidative metabolism, which is like healthy cell metabolism, and the other one is a more fermentive state called aerobic glycolysis, where protein and fat is going down through another process, and ketosis and all this sort of thing comes about because of this, which is really secondary and not the proper process that should be engaged where metabolism is. So the cell where it's lost its terrain, where dead food was not life food, and life colloid switch from aerobic glycolysis, they switch back to aerobic glycolysis from oxidative metabolism, and it's a very inefficient form of energy, which could be switched back to oxidative metabolism. And this is you healing up neoplastic condition. So the cells have sentience, you see. They can sense, oh, we've got to just survive ourselves, and now we have to accept all that debris, because otherwise it's going to be just excessive for our immune system to manage that. So it sort of has a sentience. It's sort of a programmed cell life cycle to come to be some completedness, where it just manages itself until it dies. So pleomorphing is many changing forms below the level of a cell, where organelle are and life colloid, and where the tissue is, it really is like your red blood corpuscle has totipotency to become any component that's needed at the site where injury is, from the double spore building block that exists within the red blood corpuscle that's excavated where, some injury is or repair is needed. And on the journey where the life cycle is, you've got everything reduced back to dust, and dust, from dust we come, and it uses this lactic acid pathway otherwise on a fermentative level. But on this oxidative level, you're looking at that pathway. It's sort of very inefficient in relation to 38 adenosine triphosphate molecules that come from oxidative metabolism instead. So where the other state would be remained switched on as a rapid cell wall repair, and simple endoblastic cells being formed, which is neoplasm, and that using a pathway which is aerobic glycolysis, it produces a lot of lactic acid which ferments, and after that it's really problematic where things are the terrain, you see. So cells where your life colloid is within is the building block of your cells, not the cell. And you're looking at blood tests and things, you're looking at things, you could really see enzyme systems being present. You've got prostate-specific antigen showing up where neoplastic conditions could be of the scanner gland or the prostate gland. And carcinoembryonic sort of antigen is another one I can think of, associated, of course, to colorectal sorts of neoplastic conditions of the lung and the breast and gastrointestinal sorts of neoplasm. In regular blood tests, you could look and see that's got your CA125 if you're a female to look to see if there's any ovarian types of conditions. You've got alpha-fetoprotein, which is a marker more of fermentation where the liver and germ cells are, and tumours, of course. And human chorigonotropic hormone, which could be associated more testicular and germ cell sort of neoplastic conditions and things. So pushing the boundaries a little bit more where you're being aware of that being asleep, being dreaming and being wakeful are all really limited states, and awareness is above those states. So who is real is living, and who is aware of perception and dreaming and this state of sleep and wakefulness, you should be aware is a very limited phenomenon, and all the channels should be lined up, where your wakeful state is. So who's controlling the corpse where, somebody is sleepwalking, or who's controlling the corpse who's paying the piper above, and what's followed along where that is. So clean energy evermore could be tapped like a JC Quanta is, and dirty fuel that's very costly and heavy. And don't tell me that there hasn't been a monopoly that's just foisted all of that on everybody. But drummed out by a monopoly and over, just big corps that's only owned by one basic banking system and all highly processed dead food. You've got all of these big companies and they're engaged in just putting any junk into the food. And so, of course, there's a big claim where that is. But the corporate level where argument is that you've got an unfair marketed ultra-processed food and most people knew that a lot of the substances they were putting in that food could make people not well. And lawsuits, which is a claim, being discharged. You've got financial compensation where cities should be, helped, and serious health conditions that have come about because of all of those foodstuffs. It's really a bit of a fallout, even coming from the sky. You've got Jubb cell rejuvenation you can focus on and look at, correcting the vibratory frequency of missing cells. And you could learn about magnetronics. You could see that how music and sound heals. And there's a great podcast you could tune into. It's called Life Music. And you could tune into that because you could really get a sense of the natural magnetic frequencies, which really life really loves, and disease is altered. You've got life food, a Jubb cell rejuvenation, giving you back your body, and whole brain functioning, giving you back your brain. And you've got life food, of course, the Jubb cell rejuvenation, giving you better frequency. And what's orthophilic meaning straight with nature? It's sort of vibrating back to health and strengthening the organism to resist a disruption to ease your ordinary field. And heat and cold therapy and caster packs all influence this fourth state of matter, which is plasma, and altering also the three-dimensional stereoscopic structure of things to function properly. Orthophilic just means basically that your properties had a straight with nature, so a compound that could have a metal oxide in it, but in our life it really has a noble element instead, and these can function the same. So you've got a base and an acid, and you've got a amplitude of energy that could be harvested from this. So permittivity is a property of a substance to be able to store magnetic energy, and silicon carbon are the ones only where the elementary chart is that can do this. And amphiphilics really relates to a compound where molecules have a great polar water solubleness, and groups which attach to the water insoluble condition of hydrocarbon chain. And you've got things which is totally not orthophilic at all. It's called non-physiological salts, and they can't do any of that above. So a process of information that's unique, of course, where the meaning is, and huge columns of space, if you're looking out into space. And you know, of course, all of these columns, that's right, when you're looking across the universe, and you realise that we're living in a stellar universe, meaning universe upon universe. And in our universe, which we look across it, you see massive columns of space rolling in on each other and rolling away from each other as well. So a universe which is uncaused and uncausal, and multiple conditions having been present, and no single act of any causedness, and not a multiple but a stellar. You're looking at what's moving, or a thought that something is moving away when it's not, and it's space just rolling away from itself, and parts rolling where things are more three-dimensionally looked at. And so as space is looked at more three-dimensionally, and you can see that it's completely changing all the time. So Hubble's constant is just off the chart, completely off the chart. You have to have a non-Euclidean background to start to consider science. And so it's an expansion of this flat plane, and just like the topic where we're looking at things, do you know what's going inside space and also outside space, you see, for space. So where somebody's just in their mind had something apparently scientific like the Big Bang, which isn't, it's not. And so the idea that, oh, yeah, something is expanding at a certain rate, moving away from each other, it's like, oh, my God, don't tell me that that is so. How could that be? It's just completely off the chart wrong. So a Big Bang theory that states that the universe started like 13.7 billion years ago or something from a hot, dense point, it expanded. It's like, please, expanded? Based upon what? I mean, are you looking at something just where something is, and you're considering that to be space when it's not? Whatever what you look at and consider interpretation of a redshift where cosmic microwave energy is, it certainly explains the natural condition of a slippery slope, meaning that you have to accept something which hasn't been shown or proven, and now you're going to go on to other things which you can't. So a paradigm like a Big Bang is just something precognitive, isn't it? It's sort of something there to have framed the way you thought about something to come up with stuff, and this is just really a great subject bias. So the process of new information and a paradigm paralysis exists where missing information isn't reevaluated, and it's due to be then having some subject bias. You're examining what's precognitive in this show, what's the fourth dimension, and what's this third state where life is, and that life is existing between what you thought is dead and life. And to predict sort of future events, precognitive dialogue sort of governs what success is or not. And if you've accepted as science, what is it that you have? Of course, whole brain functioning patterning is going to allow you to more overcome everything because you've really got more courage, confidence, and conviction and things. But clearing a paradigm paralysis is essential, you see, for innovation and progress. And it's just you and I having a more temporal left lobe involved centre and senses and weighing information below consciousness, where an active neologism is produced, you see. So even where random phoneme generator is, that's a skimmer, and it's skimming from the weighted information that's in channels that's below, causing you to select verbs and words, and in your verbal and non-verbal capacity, and speech. And so you're using kinesthetic, auditory, and visual conditions where the senses are, and that's going to be giving you a sense of genius more. And your word selection is really coming from these channels of consciousness, you see. So what's subject to choice and word usage, and what reveals everything sort of more is a neologism which arises where your left hemisphere sequence is getting you to have language, and you've got this accurate fasciculus which is connecting your Broca's area and your Wernicke's area and your motor cortex controlling speech muscle. And so, the sounds that I'm making is engaging this motor cortex inside you, and language is pattern motor movement, basically. So the angular gyrus, which is integrating your auditory, visual, sensory language information in neurology, could be damaged, of course, and could be non-functional because somebody's sort of really in a state of aversion, more not getting into their frontal cortex and left hemisphere. And certain gut conditions can cause quite damage where these areas are, to cause all sorts of aphasia. So the damage to this area is like the Broca area, where speech production is and kinesthetic motor sequencing is, and damage to the Wernicke's area and comprehension and meaning can cause someone to really sort of have a loss of their access to the external world.
Dr. Chuck, can I ask you a question?
Yes, mate.
Oh, thank you so much for everything you do. I just was wondering, because I do the best I can to eat healthy and follow life food, and it just seems like there's a lot more to it. But what can we do with all the corporate monolith, I guess, trying to get us?
Well, first, of course, any change only happens because you've got a band of a small committed few. This doesn't require, a lot of people or mass people. It's just one of the people. But you or I, what matters that we could move more into a golden age is that you're using Article 3 and Article 4 courts, and you really understand that there's a private side of the court and there's a public side, and it's the private side of the court where you've got all your title and right that flows from, and this is you as a living being who sits above everything. It's a corporation, and so this is the component of everything that should be activated, and it only is from your third-party verified conditioning, which a public trust rather than a block and a chain does, and using the technology that exists of a public trust with the .arm and having a server which all of us own versus no, it's only owned by a service provider, which that would be wrong, of course, continuing on with that. Having positive inductive currency is a new reset. What's that mean? It means zero out the debt. That's it. Finished. There's no more debt. And so you're modelling things for everybody. And don't you think that people want to invest in something where you can have a claim settled? Of course they do. They don't want to be invested in any system where you can't have a claim that's settled. And so where somebody continuously be integrous, you've got allies, which is unknown, which all step forward more, you see. And it's your integrity or mine which draws upon what this is. And so, it's a strange attractor where any claim comes to be as a charge. It sets up its own strange attractor, and that strange attractor would be to be so that that charge becomes discharged and becomes expressed, yeah. So there's so many issues, isn't there, that all could be corrected. There's what's above contract and what's above government. All of this is Article 3 and Article 4, and this is a common law court of record trial by jury process, and this is the kind of thing which we have many, many, many times over, so it comes to be able to correct the things that we've got going on. We've got a really great podcast that's coming up. You might want to tune into that. That's coming up. And it really is for you and I. How about we learn that communication is the response that you get back? That's a great concept. What does that mean? That means I could have good intention. I could have an intention, but the response that I get back is the effect of my communication and yours as well. And so let's stick with the response. And it's an amazing thing, of course. We've got a really great show that, you've got universal principles in the way that you and I use our brain. And we've only got math, honest, yes, with that. And there's really three types of response that it can exist, where smart contract is or science is. So I think that we should be focused on what those three brain processes are, and what's the preferred mode of you having sorted information that allows you to live more in whole brain patterning versus limited mind function. Really great show coming up, Lukey. It comes from the show that we've just been talking about, because we've been talking about plasma, yes, as the fourth state of matter. And your beingness itself and language is coding things on this level, and this is what forms DNA and RNA and everything else. So should we certainly be interested in these three ways that you're processing information, and there's two of these ways which you could get everything done and you're sorted for agreement, and then there's another process which we're going to be talking about, which is polarization, and what happens with that sort of response. Yeah. So tune into our next show that's coming up, because it's a really great one, great podcast. Yeah.